Welcome, data enthusiasts. I'm Joseph, co-founder of Zuma Recruitment. We are the only recruitment consultancy focused 100% on data tech professionals and 100% in the Berlin region. Today, this is our podcast, Data for Good, connecting you with all things data. And today, we are also joined by Anna Smolina. Anna is an experienced and senior data and business leader, data enthusiast and keynote speaker, and soon to be appearing in a new business. Anna, hi, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello, Joseph. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Brilliant, brilliant. And today, I understand we are going to be talking about the great challenge of getting ROI or getting return on investment from data.
Or with the help of data, depending, yes.
I see. Oh, brilliant. Getting return on investment with the help of data. Excellent. So I know this is a topic that's dear to you. Tell me why it's so important, do you believe? And also what perspective or from whose perspective will we be approaching this today?
So I would say that today's topic is actually less of a data topic and more of a business one, as you can judge by the name. And the reason that it's so dear to me, and I have been thinking and working in this space for years now, is that it's one of the biggest struggles every business I have ever worked for has. When you're deciding where do you want to invest money or what is that that you want to be doing, you want to start with what matters most and where you can get the highest return from the time, people, money that you're investing. This also spans over data teams, as you can see, because mainly the data teams are in a way supportive function, right? Except of maybe data products, which are creating the products directly for the end user. When our stakeholders are coming to us, to the analysts or engineers, I have observed that many data teams, doesn't matter actually how senior they are, but especially with more junior teams, maybe, they struggle to decide what to do first. There is all this ad hoc requests, there is this endless dashboards coming in. Today, the stakeholders want one thing, tomorrow they want another thing. And, this is turning into endless struggle on both sides because stakeholders are not getting what they want. And data teams feel a bit overwhelmed and maybe not delivering up to their full potential. And in the end, the whole company needs to agree on how to prioritize their work. And this is why, this topic of ROI for me is something that everyone needs to think about. It's not just for the data teams. It's not just for the business teams. It's this collaboration point that needs to be discussed in depth. And once implemented correctly, it brings additional speed, satisfaction, and a lot of saved resources to both sides. And this is just beautiful to watch.
I'm sure, as it evolves. How much do you think perception is involved in this challenge or this problem, given that sometimes the perception is that data teams are this support function for the business?
I think the perception, and sometimes actually data teams perceive themselves in this way as well, can get in the way because the given level of responsibility and proactivity is needed to push the system forward, right? If someone is coming to you with a bunch of requests and you're an analyst, for instance, you need to feel comfortable enough to suggest backwards, not just to say yes, sir, and go to execution, but to suggest what would be the best way to go about the problem. And this is already a bit more than support function, right? It's sort of the best level of support. Although I have to say that I don't see anything wrong about being a support function. We know that the company without good customer service is usually failing very quickly. And from this perspective, working with your stakeholder and partnering with your stakeholder may be that. But it's on the both sides. I think it all starts with analysts themselves of creating an image of being those partners for the business to help them make sense out of their ideas and quantify them so they can make better and educated decisions. But, it's a two-sides road. It's a lot about communication.
So analysts can do more to articulate themselves better.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what can, irrespective of whether data, whether we can see the impact financially of data, irrespective of that, what can leaders do to change that perception? And I'm thinking of the Berlin data leader community who might be having similar struggles. What can they do to change perception at C-level or leadership level?
We need to be useful, and we need to be able to connect what we're doing to the money, because you only get more money from where the money is. Like, if you're capable of demonstrating that what you're doing is helping the business ultimately, then you will have no problems with perception, and this being useful only makes sense if it helps the business. Not every business is for profit, right? There is no non-profit businesses as well. But if CEO is capable of making better decisions, convince the investors for the startups, for instance, or drive the business operationally in a better way, thanks to you, and to the better way to prioritize and do the right things, and decide that there are things that you don't want to be doing, or maybe you'll be doing later. This is how you can establish yourself. And I think many of us are shying off from it, especially if we're working with very senior stakeholders. It can come to a lot of pressure. It can come to a bit of shyness, but it shouldn't be the case, because the power of data is immense. We, the data teams, have usually the most of the knowledge about how the company works in the whole company, because data, especially in the startup scene in Berlin, let's say, it's like blood in the body, it's everywhere. It's driving force for every decision to happen, or it should be, or it has potential to be. And if we can leverage that, I think there really shouldn't be any problems about how data is being perceived.
I would agree with you there. I wonder whether being stronger cheerleaders at leadership level to help convince CEO and shareholders of this great power of data, whether that cheerleading skill is something else that data leaders could work on, because we have just been through a very rocky and uncertain period with layoffs across the city and even across the world. And whilst I don't think data professionals were affected the most, they were certainly affected. And as we have come to understand, data is everything. It's the blood and body, as we've said, the blood running through the body. Okay, so what I'm aware you've told me previously that you have some tools and a bit of a framework. I'm wondering, with that, what kind of practical things we'll start with leaders, and then we'll go on to individual contributor level, like analysts or scientists or ML engineers. What can people at leadership level do? What tools can they adopt to improve this situation?
Let's maybe start with one important point that you also touched upon is, the cheerleading part. What cheerleaders might be sometimes missing, even if though they do a good job advertising the value of data, which I think is very important, and this is a sales part of our job, which not all of us love doing, but definitely all of us need to do. It's asking the right questions. The value that you're delivering is beginning from how in-depth your understanding of the business problem is. And this is something which also goes both ways. So for me, for instance, in the role of director of data and analytics, I would be working with a director of products, director of marketing together. And it's my job to understand where the biggest pain points are, or perceived pain points, and go deep into suggesting what do we have at hand to potentially be able to solve them. So you go both ways, and this is really an iteration, like what's something that we did at one of the companies I worked for. We created a sort of a form a request form for the stakeholders. The business was not very mature when it comes to data, and it needed this iterative guidance. And this request form, it's not necessarily, like you need anything from us, fill the form, right? But it's more a guidance for the analyst which questions to ask from the stakeholders. So for instance, what is that you need today? Why do you need it? Mm-hmm. What will you do with it once you have it? What will you do if you don't have it? Is there something already existing? Which problem are you actually trying to address before jumping into resolving the request? And this is an application, for instance, for prioritizing the backlog. This framework that you refer to, it's a backlog prioritization framework. I will tell you more about it later, but without going a bit more in the details there. It starts with this formulation of the request and understanding the scope of the problem and the impact of this when done or not done. The most useful application goes, for instance, for product teams. When you're having a backlog of ideas on your table, and you need to decide, and you have one development team to work on them, and you need to decide where do you start. So which of these backlog items should be the first one to be supported by the analysts, by the engineers, by the developers? And for this, you need data. But to provide this ROI calculation, which is very simple, right? It's like, what return do you expect from it versus how much, people, time and money do you want to invest into making this happen? To assess the size of the segment of the users or people affected by anything you're doing, you need to have a very good foundation in your data to know your user segments. Just to give you an example, I'm developing, I have two products on the backlog that I want to develop. One is a landing page for my CEO team, and another one is a apply now button or buy now button, not on this landing page, on another one. Which one is more important? So I would need to understand the data, I need to look at the data, how many users are exposed to this right now, for instance, how many people interact with it, and how do those landing pages convert into opportunity costs or money down the road. And but to be able to assess it, I first need to understand what the product is going to be. So I think the most practical advice, coming back to your question, is to start the dialogue on understanding the issue and the problem you're trying to solve for the business in depth before you start doing anything at all, but also have a system for yourself as an analyst and better for stakeholders, because eventually you want to outsource it. You don't want to lock it to the analytics team. Is to have this baseline available to say, if I change this, this is how much money I'm going to get from it. If I change that, this is how much money I'm going to save from it. So it's very easy to calculate afterwards. Does it make sense?
Interesting. Yeah, it does make sense. And one of the first points you made was about questioning and uncovering pain points.
Yeah.
And even earlier than that, you talked about, and I'd read your earlier article about how analysts don't always like being salespeople. And I think, or would I be right in saying, doing that questioning, uncovering, understanding the pains and the problems is part of that whole sales consulting?
In a way.
Understanding what the problem, yeah.
In a way it
is.
Because if you're trying to sell the service, and I'm sure when you are starting, for instance, Zuma starts to work with a new customer, what do you do first? You try to understand what they need, right? So you can see whether you have something to offer to address this problem. Ideally, you have it immediately at hand. I have seen the system being the most successfully implemented and the teams being the most impactful in the businesses where the analyst would be a part of the management meeting, immediately pulling out the information which is being missing in the meeting. But also, if you don't have it already, the fact of you asking these questions and making educated answers about them or suggestions on how to tweak them will create an image that you know what you are doing. And this is what should be happening, because very often in the teams, the analytics teams are not close enough to the business. So they're not able to ask the educated questions, right? And this is the worst that can happen to you, because as an analyst, you need to understand what your data tells you and what it means in the real world. Because depending on how you collect it, how you mark it, it can mean a million of different things. And the analysts are usually the ones who are connecting the dots, right? Between the engineering teams, between the implementation teams and the business teams. And this role of a translator, it's only possible if you know both languages. You can't be translator knowing just one.
Yeah. So I get that about the analyst being in these management meetings and understanding what the impact would be from any given decision or move. How does it relate to analysts either working centralized or decentralized? Because I would have thought decentralized, embedded in these business teams, they could do a much better job of helping the business see the return on investment. Is that how it typically works?
This is a very interesting question. I didn't think that we'll be covering it today, but it's the one that is popping up every now and then. I can share my opinion about it. Okay. Centralized, decentralized, and something in between all have right to exist. Which one is the most suitable for the business depends on the size of the business and maturity of the teams, both business teams and analytics teams. So for instance, full embedment for me means, first of all, what does it mean, right? Like you have an analyst and the analyst is reporting to business leader, let's say head of marketing. This is having a benefit of increased speed of response to the business point and also in-depth understanding of this line of the business. What you're losing at this point is a connection, right? When the analyst is a part of the business function, this analyst is not necessarily aware of what the analyst in the product department would be doing or how the overall data for the company looks like. And in the worst case, you might start reinventing the wheel, pulling out the same requests and also limiting the analyst growth because they can't learn from one another. And as a matter of fact, because some companies are trying to decentralize too early, in my opinion, and that removes this alignment layer on methodology, knowledge sharing, understanding the bigger picture. Decentralization, however, is absolutely irreplaceable when you're a mature, large business and you need this flexibility and you can't maintain the central team of 200 people. It just doesn't make sense anymore, right? Small centralized teams are good for the businesses which are just starting. You want this knowledge sharing. You are just learning about the business. You don't have too many stakeholders to support, and you have 5 people in total, in the analytics and data team, let's say, or some of them are engineers, some of them are, engineering analysts, some of them analysts. Decentralizing them will not help. But there is something in between, and this is actually a very good model for the companies in transition in the change space. I call it semi-embedded. Quite frankly, I don't know how, I haven't seen this term nailed elsewhere yet. What it means is that the analysts are partnering with the business teams on the daily basis. They share OKRs with them. They share goals with them. They are, for instance, in the dailies of the product stand-ups with their respective teams if they're product analysts, but they report to central analytics function, which means they're still a part of the team, but they're working with the teams on the daily basis very closely. And this helps you to transition from the central to decentralized and build the foundation of methodology while creating very good business understanding, but also enabling exchange between the analysts within the teams themselves. And this one is a very underused model, actually, in the market.
Yes, we see a lot of businesses moving towards decentralization and not necessarily considering the semi-embedded or hybrid model. And I think this point is a very pertinent point for return on investment because of the impact that data professionals can have either in that centralized or decentralized mode. Can I ask, to help return on investment, why could a semi-embedded team not be the most effective in a large business that has already transitioned?
It might be that it's just simply management difficulty, depending on how large the business is. So I ran semi-embedded team in the business of 3,000 people. If we go for a mark of 10,000 people, and I had 20 people doing just analytics, engineering was not even there, right? If we go to the team of 10,000 to 16,000 or 20,000, what should my team be? 100 people? I mean, it is sort of, it is feasible, but then you're going into all of this layering, and then you need to see, does it even make sense? Because when the company is reaching a given size, and it's not just about the size, it's about the complexity of the product. If we're speaking about the giants, let's say like Volkswagen or Deutsche Bahn, the reason for their size is huge operations on the one hand side, but on the other hand side, it's complexity of the business units. And some of them, they're actually separate companies. They don't talk to each other that much. And this is why the value of this central component is very limited, because the relevance of what, some subpart of Volkswagen new development unit for, I don't know, medical services is doing is of no relevance for automotive part and the rest of the business. So you always want, there is never a magic pill, right? Or a simple recipe that fits all. It always depends on the needs of the company. It's just something that we should be aware of, I think, is that sometimes decentralization happens for the wrong reasons. And mainly it happens because the central teams were very inefficient or not fast enough. And this is where we come back to ROI, not solving the right problems first. So the stakeholders start having the feeling that their objectively urgent and important problems are not being addressed, because you have 5 overwhelmed analysts for the 1,000 sized company, and this is just not enough. And if you don't have a system in place how to decide how to prioritize those requests across the whole business, it might feel like we'll never get anything done unless we have our own analysts. And this is what is very often happens. The leaders start just hiring their own analysts just to get the things moving for themselves. And this is not a very good reason, right? Like, this is something that should be addressed earlier.
Okay, noted. So from the leadership perspective, we've touched upon cheerleading and representation of analysts in those management meetings. We've also talked about organizational structure of data team members, whether that be centralized, decentralized, or something in the middle. If we can look at the earlier point about the analyst needing to adopt a slightly different mindset or behavior, particularly you mentioned in your LinkedIn post about the sales mindset. How can an analyst live into this more to help the business get better or more ROI?
Something that I would suggest the analysts working with me is always to start building relationship with the people, because in the end, every business unit is driven by the people, and each of them are having their own problems and concerns. And the best that analysts can do is to go out with, let's say, head of marketing, invite them for lunch, and say, listen, I want to understand a bit better. What is that's bothering you? Like, can I please join your next team meeting just to listen in, and to see what kind of discussions you are having? Maybe, I will have some idea how to help you. Maybe I will not. The chances are they probably will if they listen careful enough, right? And if they raised a couple of questions, they can come to the next meeting and say, remember, we discussed this, and like, I have some data to support you. And this means, in my native language, we have a saying, like, to be a plug for every barrel, like, you have to be sort of everywhere, and you have to make yourself seen. And I understand it's not very comfortable for everyone, but it can also be done. And for me, this is also my job as a leader to suggest this, to say, hey, listen, do you want like one of my team members to come in and listen in for the discussions? We in the sense of analytics team need to be perceived not as reporting machines, not as ad hoc monkeys, right? Or just these guys give you the data. This is like the worst. Like, if you hear, please give me the data, this not from your engineer, that means you're not doing your job very well. So the stakeholders should start coming to you with questions, with the business questions that they know you can answer. And for this, this is how you create your image. It takes time, but in a year, it's completely different story. I have seen this happening, you know, transforming the teams from request to come in and becoming a part of the strategic projects, because we were able to demonstrate that we can deliver the value. But for this, we need to start talking to people, and we need to get ourselves out there.
Okay, good. So it's a red flag if one of your stakeholders comes to you and simply asks for the data, and maybe it's a suggestion that you've not been doing the consulting side of your position.
I mean, all things considered, right? Like, the world is not black and white. It can be a new stakeholder. It can be someone who is coming from the company where things were done this way. It might be that the level of the self-service that you're providing is not sufficient. It can mean many things, but generally, if this is a stakeholder with whom you work for months and they keep on coming to you and saying, give me the number of visits on the homepage, I mean, something goes wrong.
Yeah, sure. A business in its purest form is about profiteering. I wonder if the view of the analyst having more of this sales consulting aspect is a must-have in this new age. If we are to have data teams as one of the key ROI teams, then should this be a facet of the modern day analyst, that they firstly build the relationships with leaders and senior stakeholders, but also have this kind of basket of consulting practices where they're able to uncover the pains and the problems and approach it with a commercial mindset?
I think it's extremely valuable. This is what's turning the team from reactive to proactive eventually. You know, this ability to ask the right questions, and which is improving the quality of the results. Now, one thing that we need to consider is that data teams come in all shapes and sizes, right? And there are purely technical parts of data which don't have maybe the same needs. However, even with that, I have to say, this is what engineers very often struggle with, right? They're not exposed to stakeholders so much, so they don't even have this opportunity to ask those questions unless they make an extra effort. And this is what's leading to this looping of modeling, remodeling, rebuilding pipelines nonstop, because this business question was not understood in the first place. But at the core of their job, I think the need to understand as in depth as an analyst is not always there, once again, depending on which kind of domain you're working. But I think it's always beneficial. And I think the value of analytics team is increasing with the understanding of the business. But when we started this topic today as well, when I'm speaking about ROI, I also think it's our job to help the business understand return on investment of other initiatives. It's not just about the work that we're doing, because usually analytics team or technical teams are enabler teams, right? So let's say you've got this new data model. What do you do with it? Why did you do it? Did it help something else? You know, and this is before you even started building. This is what you need to understand. What else is it helping to achieve? The same for the technical projects. But even for the product teams, this is what I hear very often. They're like, we have all these ideas, we have this whole backlog, and we can keep ourselves occupied forever. But where should we start? And this is where analysts can help. Working together with the business, they can help, and this is what this framework of mine is based on, to understand the segment size, to analyze, like, if you introduce this button, how much of an uplift can you even expect, you know, based on the historical data that we're having? And if you're having this uplift, how does it convert to money? And you're saying you're having 5 engineers on this job for the next 3 quarters, and it's just, you know, it doesn't fit together. Or if you do this button not just on this page, but on 10 more pages, then it might be worth it. And this is sort of the help that we can provide to the business. The trick here is, though, to try not to do it in silos and introduce the system to the whole business, because usually the departments are interconnected, right? And they share the same resources and the same budgets. So if you're using this, you need to use it for product, for marketing, for sales, to make sure that the whole company is operated on ROI eventually, right? And not just one team works like this and the rest of the company does, whatever they thought is the most important thing to do, right?
I see. So that ability to spread the message business-wide, is that impacted by how the data teams are structured or set up, being embedded, centralized, or something in between?
I think it's mainly impacted by people that you're having. And this is why, every leader always is striving to hire the best people, right? Because people in your team are your main asset. I have seen centralized teams doing better jobs than embedded teams in spreading the message, because there were the people who would come and, have 5 lunches that week with different business leaders. This head of marketing just told me they have this campaign which is going to affect this other thing that you're doing right now with the product. Have you guys talked? And having been this connecting point, you don't have to feel limited by hierarchical levels, the structure of your team, even the level of your seniority. It's about taking responsibility on yourself to drive the change forward. I think this is what it comes to in the end.
That's also a note to analysts who want to progress their career, about having these commercial and communication skills. If you want to get ahead, you should be thinking about the business problems rather than simply the data problems, and furthermore, how to address them or how to communicate them with stakeholders across the business.
I agree, but I have heard different opinions as well, and I also understand where they're coming from. Some are saying sometimes I need the technical expert and I don't care whether they can communicate or not. I'm going to communicate for them. I personally disagree with this, because but there are some companies that can afford it in a way. And this is usually for the bigger companies, when you're like, listen, we have communicators. How many communicators do you need? What's the ratio of people who can and can't communicate, And some can't, especially startups. They just can't afford having people who are not a full package in a way, unless this is a one-time project.
Okay, so that's also a note for the startup environment then. If you're looking to join that environment, appreciate that one of the many hats that you need to wear is this whole consulting and strong communication skills.
Ideally,
business. Yeah,
you can stay in the company without it for years, and there are also people who are fine with that. It's a personal choice and it's a company choice in the end. But I think the biggest value that you can leverage out of your work, if you understand what you are doing for the business, right?
Understood. Anna, what have we missed? Or what have I not asked you?
I think one of the things we have missed on how exactly to do it. So how would the framework like this look like in practice, and how to introduce this process to the business if it's not doing it this way yet?
Excellent. Framework.
Yeah.
Let's go through this.
So for the framework itself, there is something that I can even show for our listeners as an example. But take it, with an open mind and a grain of salt. Still, I think having something visual in front of you might actually help. So let me maybe share my screen just for a second, and then it will be very concrete. And this is a tool which everyone can simply start using immediately. And this is what I like about it, because it's very, very simple. So can you see the screen with the table?
Yes, we can.
All right. So what you see here is a prioritized backlog based on the ROI calculation, right? And how you go about it, you're having 3 backlog items. Whereas in this case, it's for the product, because you can use the system for internal processes as well. This is what I have done in the past. But the most value it brings for the functions which are as close to the revenue or costs as possible. So landing page conversion optimization, search algorithm improvement, e-com firm optimization. Where should you start as a product team? And this is where we are coming in. We're saying, all right, and this is just be aware, this is not detailed enough, right? Like this, you need to know the details to be able to deduct the rest. You're going, all right, what's the segment size? How many users are exposed to this system? You're looking at the segment size of 3 different products. Biggest here, smallest here for the e-com firm optimization. Then you say, all right, based on what we know, what is the base rate of the conversions that, you know, this product is driving for us? 2%, 3%, 20%, and what does it mean in total? Yeah, always percentages and totals together. What's the highest uplift we expect from 3? And then you go, okay, if we implement this, we expect the uplift. And you can base this on historical data, or you can base it on the assumption. In the beginning, the more data you collect, the more evidence you will be having. And in the future, your hypothesis will get better and better. In the beginning, it's just a hypothesis. Ideally, you have some A/B test results from the past to base it on for a product in particular. You add the conversion value from every point to this, and here you have your extra revenue or potential cost savings, so opportunity costs. You got something for free that you otherwise would have to buy, let's say, yeah? And you say, all right, here is my hypothetical for 3 products, savings of the costs or extra revenue. Then you go for investment, and you say, well, okay, how long is that going to take with how many people? You know, the most of the companies are working agile, but still you're having an estimate how much time do you want to spend on this. And you can calculate on average salaries. It doesn't matter. You know, you don't have to have too many details, like stay pragmatic about it. You just need in the ratio of the 2. I don't recommend to use the system for the business case presentation, although the way of thinking is helpful. But, you know, I have seen the PMs would grab this and say, we expect to bring you 900K with this product. That's not what's going to happen, right? This is a sort of a comparative estimate of what it might potentially bring, especially if it's not the direct revenue. This is when you can do it. In the most of the cases, it's a bit indirect. And then you have a comparison and know exactly that the first thing that you need to be doing is landing page conversion optimization in this case, right? And then the e-com form, and then something else. And you can do it with everything. You know, even with the technical projects, if you're saying, I need to turn my monolith platform to microservices, or I need to implement the data governance system. These are the most frequently asked questions to this framework, like, how do I do it? Well, those come to investment then. They need to be attached to the initiative, which is going to bring the value, and they will become a part of investment. And this is this enabler work. And when you do it internally, it's the same.
Yeah, I really like the fact that this is documented in tabular form, but documented. I'm hoping that this would be the kind of vision, so that something that's documented at the beginning as a vision for ROI, and then also referred back to as a legacy, like this is what we have been able to achieve for the business, and this is how we can continue to help you. So that's one area that I really like. And also you're helping the business to make these decisions based on data. You're making it easier for them. They're not only making data-driven decisions, but they're making it based on a comparative evidential form.
And that's exactly the point of this ROI system. It's very simple to understand. Once you keep on collecting this, you're having the evidence. It's very easy. You know, in the beginning, it's usually a tedious process to understand the segment sizes, but you can automate it. You can turn it, you can do it in Excel. You can automate it in Tableau. You can create a Python form, you know, out of it. You can enable stakeholders to do these calculations themselves. And then especially if it's product or marketing, you can test your hypothesis backwards and see, hey, we implemented this product. how good the hypothesis was. Was the uplift as we expected it? Was it more? Was it less? Did we spend more time or less time? And usually it's more time, right? So in the future, it will help you build a better hypothesis and, do better estimates. And when you're having negotiations, especially, when you're supporting not just one team, let's say you're a product analytics team, you just work with product, well, that's enough then. But if you're supporting product, marketing, operations, sales, and all of them are kind of competing for the resources in your team, you have 5 analysts in total, and you can bring them together and show them this and say, this is our estimate of all of your requests. Where do you want us to start? This would be our suggestion. Is this correct? And then you're having this buy-in from all the sides of the business, where it is a bit of a painful process because someone needs to, back off and actually say, yeah, I understand my request is not the most important one, but then you have an evidence of why it's not important one. And then you have this buy-in non-stop, and you also develop this thinking pattern of what matters, which initiatives would make it, which requests matter. And this is invaluable. This thinking pattern is probably the most valuable part that you're getting out of it. And if you don't write it down, it's going to be lost. So you need to write it down somewhere.
I definitely have it documented. Great to review for the legacy, to understand how the business can help you moving forward, but also at the start of a project or the POC phase, the conception phase, how our work can help you realize return on investment.
This is mainly prioritization work, and this has to happen before anything starts happening. And this is where management mandate is very important. So at the company where I have seen this one the most successfully implemented, this is where CEOs would be saying that not a single product backlog item makes it on the roadmap before it has the estimation to it. This is what helps for sure. Like if you're having this, if you manage to convince first the business leaders that it makes sense, and it's very easy because it's about money that they are spending and they're investing. This is what's going to make it easier for you and drive the adoption going forward as well.
Anna, thanks for sharing this.
You're welcome.
I feel like we've covered so many areas today. Yeah. We've looked at how leaders can change perceptions and shape perceptions. We've looked at the analyst, the mindset that they can take to help the business realize greater ROI. We've looked at how we can understand the role, understand ROI based on other initiatives, what our work in data can do to help other parts of the business. You've also shared a great framework or an example of a framework. So lots to take away there. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. I really hope that more and more companies will start working this way, because that's going to make a lot of happy analysts and stakeholders.
Yeah, well, it will help to evolve the whole idea and perception of data when businesses can fully realize the power of their teams.
Absolutely.
So yeah, awesome. Let's leave it there for today. Once again, a big thanks to you. I, as always, ask if people have comments or questions to address either of us, probably most through the LinkedIn comments. And yeah, to all listeners and viewers, see you all next time.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Everyone, bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.